Hey everyone, welcome into Patterns Tell Stories. I'm your host, Klaus, and today we're going to be talking about Secret Machines, the Diary. Yeah, I think it should be pretty rad to go through. With me today, as always, is my co-host, Garrett. How's it going, man?
What's up, man?
Not much. I'm stoked to go through this. I can't believe I didn't know about this until a few weeks ago, pretty much. It's basically his research written down and what he used to write the books, I guess.
Yeah, because it's a lot of like scattered thoughts, and you can tell it was just him jotting things as he was writing and researching it. But if you're interested in any of these topics that Levenda writes about, I definitely recommend trying to find one of these.
And there's just quotes in there. I'm looking at one from John Alexander, a bunch of other thoughts about certain things that he learns from Tom. After Tom has meetings with his advisors, he'll go and call Peter and be like, hey, write all this shit down. I guess it's what it seems like anyway. It's his own thoughts on secret machines as he's writing it. And I think it's cool that they felt it was important enough to put out. So let's just go through a few of these pages. And I think some of them are worth sort of expanding on and seeing where these might have arisen within the Secret Machines books. I'll just start off with this one page. It's just a couple paragraphs. And I think it was him sort of, it sounds like he was psyching himself up or just trying to get a general idea of what disclosure means, how it might manifest in our current society. He says, disclosure is happening now. It is ongoing, one contactee/experiencer at a time. It is a mistake to wait for a government agency to legitimize these experiences. Governments are at war with each other and cannot be trusted to make statements about ontological principles or theories. This ongoing event transcends politics as it must. Governments and corporations may secure physical evidence, but they cannot secure direct experience. The church may try to reinterpret the experience, but that only works for those who have not had direct experience.
There's also one from April 23rd, 2016, and it said it was from a Tom DeLonge Telcon. Roswell, Nazi craft, unrepentant group of Nazis, possibly Argentina, working with paperclip, possibly. That's an interesting part. Symbiotic relationship, get advanced technology.
What does that sound like to you?
It sounds like that Terrence McKenna quote. Terrence McKenna in the past said, we are part of a symbiotic relationship with something which disguises itself as an extraterrestrial invasion so as not to alarm us. That line touches on a lot of these bizarre aspects of what people describe. Not only do they see UFOs, in many of the stories, people say that something actually landed, like a physical craft landed. Pilots came out and talked to people. They're being told that their origins are all sorts of places. They're telling them they're from Mars. They're telling them they're from the center of the Earth. They're telling them that they're from Venus or that they're from Epsilon Eridani and that or Zeta Reticuli. And we're given all these different locations. Whatever this phenomenon is, it seems like all of these different religions in some way, shape, or form, whatever it is, like it's across cultures that there's stories of things coming from the sky, either helping or hurting human beings or having some interest in human beings' everyday lives, having an interest in human beings worshiping them and like spending a lot of their time thinking and committing their everyday rituals and everyday routines to suit a specific view that is like very structured, and it's like has to do a lot with our belief systems and our subconscious, our culture as a whole, and our values as a whole. So when Terrence McKenna is talking about like psychedelic experiences, he talks about, I'm sure people have heard this, the machine elves. It's almost like a modern version of a lot of these stories and folklore that we hear in the 21st century. In my opinion, we have Terrence McKenna's machine elves. And that is like what the human beings are reporting in their religious experiences. Joe Rogan famously said that he's seen the elves. There's been a lot of stories like that. And now we have our 21st century version of that. What I wanted to read of Jacques Vallée, because him and John Keel really nailed down on belief systems being a huge part of this, and how these UFO flaps or like more frequent years of UFO sightings and encounters seem to follow a reinforcement schedule of learning or teaching. And Jacques Vallée talks a lot about this teacher, B.F. Skinner, taught us a lot about how human beings retain information and what sort of things motivate our behavior. So I'm going to read a little bit about Skinner and just like this control system that we constantly hear from Valet. And this is from the Invisible College. If the phenomenon is forcing us through a learning curve, then it must mislead us. When Skinner designs a machine that feeds a rat, when the right lever is depressed, this is extremely misleading for the rat. But if the rat doesn't do it, he becomes extremely hungry. Man is hungry for knowledge and power. And if there is an intelligence behind the UFOs, it must have taken this fact into account. We also tend to forget that we have no choice. We must eventually study UFOs. A civilization such as ours, which is entirely oriented toward what it regards as technical progress, cannot afford long to ignore the apparition in the sky of objects that defy the laws of its physics and the performance of its rocket planes. Within a few years, the advanced countries will place on this problem, openly or in secret, their best physicists, their best intelligence specialists, their best computer scientists. But they may be powerless to utilize their expertise because the phenomenon fits none of these categories. If this is so, then UFOs can never be analyzed or conceived because they are the means through which man's concepts are being rearranged. All we can do is to trace their effects on humans. We have seen that the control system operates like a thermostat. It progresses by oscillations, drawing from the antagonism of fire and ice, warm and cold, evil and good, all myths for the feeble minds of men, equally bound by higher laws. For hot and cold are only relative to a mean, two appearances of a single fact, the motion of molecules. Few people have grasped both the physics and the beauty of it. What is the variable being controlled in this control system? Thermostats control temperature. Gyroscopes control the direction in which a rocket flies. What could a paranormal phenomenon control? I suggest that it is human belief that is being controlled and conditioned. Like the stranger in The King in Yellow, the UFO wears no mask. It is exactly what we see, but to understand it, we must face it squarely. My assumption is that a level of control of society exists, which is a regulator of man's development. I'm also led to the assumption that the actions of UFOs operates at this level. What does this explain? First, it explains why there is no contact. Direct, genuine contact would ruin the experiment. There may be deliberately misleading contact, as in UMO. It would preclude genuine learning. It explains some of the statements made by euphonauts, like, you should believe in us, but not too much, and the Shermer case with its deliberate confusion. It explains the absurdity of many cases where reactions to the phenomenon may have been invoked in terms of nonverbal consciousness rather than in logical terms. This would explain why so many witnesses are incapable of finding words to describe what they have seen. When I speak of a control system for planet Earth, I do not want my words to be misunderstood. I do not mean that some higher order of beings has locked us inside the constraints of a spacebound jail, closely monitored by psychic entities we might call angels or demons. I do not propose to redefine God. What I do mean is that mythology rules at a level of our social reality over which normal political and intellectual action has no real power. At that level, timeframes are long, of the order of a century, and evolution is slow and sure. Mass media, which are designed to give split second images of transient noise, the noisier the better, miss this signal entirely. A society with an attention span of 10 minutes, the interval between two TV commercials, can have no concept of events that have begun when my grandfather was not born yet and will end after my grandson dies. But there are such long term changes, and they may be deliberate. They dominate the destiny of civilizations. Myths define the set of things scholars, politicians, and scientists can think about. They are operated upon by symbols, and the language these symbols form constitutes a complete system. This system is metalogical, but not metaphysical. It violates no laws because it is the substance of which laws are made. The theory does not explain how UFOs are made to appear to us, although it gives support to one idea about them, that they are constructed both as physical craft, a fact which has long appeared to me undeniable, and as psychic devices, whose exact properties remain to be defined. As a focus for psychic phenomena, the UFO invokes a deep emotional reaction in the viewer, but logical development of an investigation is prevented or precluded by the apparent violations of causality that surround it and by the sociological climate that is created. Scientists may be willing to interview a witness who has seen a landed craft, but he may not wish to talk to them. Or the witness may offer as, quote, proof of his experience a couple of pancakes given to him by extraterrestrials, a recitation of meaningless messages, or a story of sexual contact with a girl from outer space. In any case, a pursuit of the rational study of the case is impossible. The lurid aspects of many such stories make their serious examination improbable, and this in turn reinforces the role of the UFO rumors as folklore, rich in new images.
That is one of my favorite passages by Jacques Miller.
I mean, it
He-
really says a lot about
yeah,
what he thinks is going on, and you can tell even an expert like him is having his trouble putting his finger on what exactly is going on. It's just a matter of examining the data. We're so eager to rally behind myths, and like it's not even something that we're eager to do. It's almost something that we just do without even realizing it.
it's funny the two most prolific writers, Keel and Valet, are always like, be careful. They totally are self aware. And I think that's what makes them great at what they do, is just the awareness of the situation and that they could be getting messed with at any point. How myths themselves and whether or not they believe them or not.
You're familiar with that line from Tom DeLonge, right? Where he talks about how eventually they learned some of these crashes were intentionally enacted by the others as a way to give technology to rival countries, as a way to instigate war, to make better weapons, to fight bigger wars.
Yeah,
That idea is what I think Levenda was touching on when he said symbiotic relationship. There's the symbiotic relationship that there could be a higher intelligence guiding us, and there's also that element of it that maybe it's guiding us with this indifferent attitude towards
right.
what we are that's much more alien to us and how we see ourselves. There's multiple types of ways to view this
Yeah.
symbiosis. Whichever way you slice it, there's this unsettling feeling of something that's indifferent towards humans.
People talk a lot about the zookeeper theory. I guess the idea is that there's a non human intelligence sort of acting as like a zookeeper. And maybe this is for an experiment or it's like a farm, I think Tom has mentioned. And there's pictures of people who work with pandas. And Lewis talked about this as well. They put on these panda suits so they can go do medical or, some sort of checkup on them. The suit itself helps the panda not be too freaked out. I wonder if the panda suit is similar to something like a gray, because the grays, they look close enough to us that they don't freak us out, but there's something off about them. I'm wondering if that's similar to dudes who in panda suits. I'm sure they seem close enough to how the panda would interpret them, but he knows they're not really a panda.
A lot of people report seeing is this idea of this like gray thing, bald and has a big head, or maybe it's short, something that people identify very easily. They're like, that's an alien right there. Look, like the cover of Communion, Whitley Strieber's book. People say like when they saw that on the shelves, it was like this primordial. I know what that is. That's an alien. I don't
Yeah.
know why I think that, but that's an alien. Valet was touching on this in Passport to Magonia. And in the cover, you see that idea that what we're interacting with or what we're seeing could very well be some sort of technology. And we're interacting with the technology, but what the technology is doing, I wouldn't say it's just one thing.
This is what Travis Taylor says. He basically sees the brain as a quantum computer, and he bases that off of Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff's OR theory. Microtubules are acting as quantum processors. He basically thinks that everyone kind of has a database in their head, just quantum information in general that we can access, whether it's part of a non-local field or something like that is, I guess, up for debate. We have a database that we can reference as we're experiencing our reality. It's rendering visually. If something is not within the database of the quantum computer that is our brain, the computer decoheres, and whatever's left that's the closest thing is how we interpret whatever that thing is that we do not have in our database. So that's what the paranormal is us trying to process something that we do not have any frame of reference for in the database that is our brain.
So just to be clear, Travis Taylor is the scientist, right?
Yeah, he works at Skinwalker Ranch
Yes.
TV
Okay.
show, the main guy on the UAP task force. He writes a lot of science fiction books, actually. I haven't read any of those, but this is where he presents his theory of quantum consciousness. And he basically tries to prove the law of attraction with quantum physics. And this really echoes a lot, too, of what Tom DeLonge talks about. You make your own reality kind of thing. So he talks about a book that he wrote. He tells a funny story about how he was reading a science fiction book and like threw it down. I was like, there's no science in the science fiction book. And his wife told him, if you think you can do better, why don't you write a book? And that's when he started writing books. So he explains that story. He says that we're all connected to each other through quantum physics. This is actually true. In quantum computers, we set up a question that might be as simple as asking square, and then we interact that question with the database around it. Instantly, the question will cohere or reduce to the thing in that database most like it, i.e., anything with a square shape, and cause all the other possible answers to decohere. In other words, with quantum computers, like things will stick around and unlike things will vanish. What's even more interesting is that these things don't have to touch each other at all to do this. They just have to be quantum connected. In physics speak, we say that their mathematical wave functions are entangled. But before we get too weighed down in quantum physics, the important eureka moment for me was that our brains could be quantum computers. I immediately started with a flood of ideas about this. I stayed up all night reading papers on the internet about OR. If OR theory turns out to be right, then our brains truly are quantum computers. That means every thought we have sets up a quantum question in our brain. This question is called a quantum state, by the way. Then it interferes that state with the perception of the universe our brain has stored in it from our lifelong stimulations sights, sounds, dreams, feelings, smells, touches, you name it. And the state causes a reality or observation to occur or reduce into being. For example, imagine seeing a red sports car go down the street. Immediately, your brain sets up the visual state of the thing you just saw. It then interacts that visual state with all your memories, and instantly you know the visual state is a red sports car. The like memories cohere or stay, and the unlike memories, say of an orange baboon or a silver train or a white horse, decohere, i.e., go away. One of the other intriguing things about this phenomenon of quantum connectedness is that not only is the action instantaneous, it doesn't matter how far apart the states are separated physically. The connection can truly be from one side of the universe to the other, and the action still happens instantly. At one science fiction convention, there was an author there who was a Wiccan. I had known this author for a while, respected her opinions, and knew she was smart. We had been friends for a couple of years, but I had no idea of her religious beliefs before that moment. So she told me that Wiccans get together in their coven and plan what they are going to perform magic on, and then they focus on what they want to happen. She told me about how they have to keep their mental focus and how they must visualize what they wanted in a certain way with a clear mind, or it wouldn't work. And she told me that it didn't matter how far away the coven was from what they wanted to affect. Then she smiled and said, I'm glad that science is finally catching up with what we Wiccans have always known.
So it's like this converging of what these belief systems keep telling their patrons. Scientists are slowly getting closer to these conclusions, and they're like,
Yep.
shit.
I know.
All the ideas of the quantum, we keep hearing that term, but I feel like that's the connecting fiber between what we see in science and can explain and what we see in the skies even today and all throughout time and can't explain. I think
Right.
that term quantum is something that Edgar Mitchell was real big on that term in quantum entanglement. So he says, we've all seen the amazing display of laser technology that can produce three-dimensional images, though they are too ephemeral to experience with the touch. In other words, one can see them, but also walk through them. The two-dimensional hologram, made with coherent beams focused on a photographic plate, is common in any novelty store. Holographic technology is just an exotic extension of the infamous double slit experiment, although it uses coherent laser beams to create an interference pattern, which in this case is a holographic image. The significant point is that a large amount of research suggests that the brain manages information in a similar fashion. A hologram analogy is valid not only for the visual sense, but for all the senses as well. The brain in every cell of the body is a quantum device, and every quantum entity has both a local, in parentheses, particle, and a non local, in parentheses, wave aspect. Prodigious amounts of information can be carried in this holographic manner, including, theoretically, the entire space time history of the learning organism. In other words, the totality of our subjective experiences can be thought of as a multimedia hologram in resonance with the 0 point field. We can observe the resonance of a violin string when a noise is struck nearby corresponding to its natural frequency, or when a vocalist shatters a glass with a strong falsetto. But it's a bit more difficult to imagine every structure and every point in the universe resonating with the underlying infinite, unstructured energy of the 0 point field. The quantum mechanical type resonance is an exchange of energy with the 0 point field such that the quote phase change or interference pattern of quantum energy carries complete information about the history of the system. In other words, one may think of the quantum resonance as carrying the information to create a hologram of the entire inner experience of an individual. This phenomenon provides a possible explanation for a host of visions, apparitions, and encounters with other beings. It also can explain Carl Jung's concepts of the collective unconscious and the reason why archetypal symbols recur in dreams, regression therapy, and shamanistic rituals.
It's really unsettling when you think about Slide 9 and how it says like psychotronic weapons and cognitive human interface. And then you think about Peter Levenda talking about how Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff were invited to DARPA to give a presentation on their Orca-War theory of consciousness. And that reminded me of two recent studies that were released on Havana syndrome. And again, it's very similar to the UFO subject where they're like, there's no aliens and that kind of thing. And it's the Pentagon investigating itself. This was pretty much the same exact thing. There were Pentagon studies done on people who were victims of Havana syndrome. And they compared those MRI results to people who were in similar jobs, they said in the study. And it was after a bunch of time had passed. And obviously the most acute effects of the Havana syndrome or anomalous health incidents, that's what they call them, had passed. It was basically trying to put the toothpaste back in the tube, like they're doing with the UFO stuff in Sean Kirkpatrick's media tour. Well, first of all, this is a DoD study. There were DoD scientists leading the effort, writing these studies. That's in itself a red flag. Part of the deal of people getting their medical benefits or getting treatment for Havana syndrome was they had to partake in these studies in order to get that treatment. There's a lawyer named Mark S. Zaid, I think Zaid is his last name. He was pretty pissed about the study when it came out. He put out a statement. He actually tagged me in it. And again, he represents a bunch of the victims. And this is what he said. The problem is that the absence of conclusive proof is disingenuously relied upon by the intelligence community and naysayers who support the public assertion that AHI does not exist. Anomalous health incidents is AHI. The government is knowingly weaponizing the lack of science that exists in this area and intentionally hiding behind a classification wall where much of the evidence that contradicts the results exists. The victims were almost always examined long after the injuries occurred, knowing many of the telltale markers would have dissipated earlier, and NIH did not have pre-event data to compare for each individual. Several of my clients were told they had to participate in the study if they wanted to receive medical treatment for their injuries. Perhaps of greater concern is the fact that one of the NIH study's authors is a senior medical official at the Department of Defense's National Intrepid Center of Excellence and has been personally involved in overseeing the diagnosis of AHI victims as having traumatic brain injuries. These diagnoses have enabled many victims to thankfully receive six-figure compensation payments from the U.S. government for being an AHI victim. The question must be asked, how can these facts be reconciled with these study conclusions that effectively say nothing there? The U.S. government must declassify what it knows about AHI to ensure accountability and truthfulness. These things keep getting tied together. And Lou Elizondo said it, people on NBC, we talked about it before, essentially insinuating that figuring out one means figuring out the other. Yeah, the stuff with Kit Green and Gary Nolan, that connection is there as well. I find it interesting that the way they're trying to spin this is that these MRIs did not show any similarities between the victims of Havana syndrome and people who had similar jobs or worked in the same embassies, as if these weren't directed attacks at the people who became sick from whatever these attacks are from. The interesting thing to think about in this context is, assuming these are real attacks and these are real physiological impacts that they're having, on these people's brains or, whatever it's affecting. I guess you have to start looking into what an MRI wouldn't detect because there are brain injuries that don't show up on MRIs. Did a little research into that actually. If consciousness is a quantum process and it's dependent on quantum states in the brain within the microtubules, and something was messed with that in any sort of way, that wouldn't show up on an MRI. If something was, on in a substructure or like at the cellular level, that kind of thing wouldn't show up on MRIs. And it's interesting that the psychotronic weapons and all that stuff is on ATIP slide 9, where the tagline is what was once considered phenomena is now quantum physics. If there's some sort of quantum weapon out there that can fuck with quantum states of the brain or the computer, the quantum computer that Travis Taylor talks about in that thing I read, that could be a reason for it not showing up on MRIs. And then, yeah, Levenda talks about the DoD meeting with Penrose and Hammeroff. Feels like there might be something there with all these connections of UFOs and Havana syndrome and the ATIP slide 9, Penrose and Hammeroff meeting with DARPA, and the fact that they're not finding anything within MRIs. You have to start looking at what wouldn't show up in an MRI, just how the symptoms are described. If it's like that, then yeah, I don't see how you don't look at more fringe ideas.
Considering that Penrose and Hammeroff presentation was around 1998, if I recall correctly. You know how they'll give an official statement like, hey, the Air Force is coming forward and they're giving their official statement now that it's been 50 years on Roswell. And now we
Mhm.
have now we can officially put this to bed. And I see that our government likes to do that with things, is they'll go like, oh, JFK was killed. We officially have closed the case. The Warren Commission has all the answers you need to know. And I could give other examples, and I'm sure people are like fuming listening because they know that like everybody's got their own example. Well, in 1998, just to put this in context, didn't they end all this remote viewing in official capacity the early 90s or mid
Yeah,
90s? After all that time, they're still giving presentations, these same people that are telling us these subjects aren't worth investigating. I hope people are wising up to it and they see that there's just this world that the everyday civilian does not get to see. And you are going to have to pry it out of them if you want them to tell the truth about some of these topics, because as more and more science comes forward and we have guys that are brilliant mathematicians and anesthesiologists like Penrose and Hammeroff, as all these subjects get more and more finely tuned, we're going to come closer to the questions that we all can't answer. I think that that's what they're investigating, is the shit that they can't answer right now, or at least they can't answer adequately. And that's why, as they say, the best and the brightest are being pulled aside to try to like work on this issue.
that is an interesting timeline you pointed out. The SAIC programs into remote viewing and all that stuff, and just consciousness in general. Anomalous cognition is what they called it. That all ended mid 90s. And then, they call in Penrose and Hammeroff in what you said, 98. So maybe that's when it went completely in the black around that time, 98. That's when I guess DARPA was showing interest in their theory. I wonder what they've done. I don't know if there's been any presentations or anything like that, but I mean, the fact that they were working with DARPA is so interesting.
Yeah, and I'd be curious for someone to ask each of these men about that presentation. Do you know if they've ever been
I don't think so.
talkative about it or went on any like Good Morning America and said like,
I've
"Hey,
talked about that. I got the Dobster sign off for that. There's a reason that they would be interested in that. That is the military. I was looking last night at anesthesia, the effects it has on the brain, and it's essentially like hypnosis. It's all kind of the same thing. There's just different ways of doing it. There's chemicals through drugs, and then there's regular hypnosis. There's the idea of electromagnetically with pulse microwaves, or that was a lot of what the IC assessment of the AHI issue talked about was electromagnetic weapons or directed energy weapons. Yeah, it seems like there's all sorts of ways to fuck with someone's brain. And if it's on the quantum level, some sort of portable quantum weapon or that fucks with your microtubules and alters your state of consciousness from remotely, it's a little scary.
oh, yeah. And John Keel, let me pull out what he says about it because he talks about this as being a reprogramming process. The contactee syndrome is a fundamental reprogramming process. No matter what frame of reference is being used, The experience usually begins with either the sudden flash of light or a sound, a humming, buzzing, or beeping. The subject's attention is riveted to a pulsing, flickering light of dazzling intensity. He finds he is unable to move a muscle and is rooted to the spot. Next, the flickering light goes through a series of color changes and a seemingly physical object begins to take form. The light diminishes, revealing a boat, if the event occurs on a lake or river, a flying machine of unusual configuration, or an entity of some sort. What's really happening? The percipient is first entranced by a flickering light. From the moment he feels paralyzed, he loses touch with reality and begins to hallucinate. The light remains a light, but his or her mind constructs something else. This can be compared with normal hypnosis. Keel says, I've been an amateur hypnotist for many years. A hypnotized subject very often thinks he is fully conscious, that the hypnosis isn't working and he is just going along with the hypnotist. But when he tries to move or disobey a command, he is surprised to find he can't. The paralysis reported in so many UFO cases is really a form of hypnosis. In the 1940s, medical science discovered the flicker phenomenon. I've always remembered that when people describe their particular encounters, I believe the sincerity of many of them, but I also think that there's other things at play when it comes to lights, buzzings, beepings. You know what I'm saying? Like these things that
Mhm.
render us immobile. There's much more to what's going on, even physiologically, with somebody when they report this type of encounter or experience. There's a whole set of conversations we could have about different intricacies of what people describe seeing. But I'm very interested in the messages people receive, the actual visual and audible
Stimuli.
sensations. Yeah, I'm curious about all of that because all of those things factor into either hypnotizing somebody or planting seeds in their subconscious. There's probably such a thorough understanding of how a human brain works if you really had all the information.
Yeah, there's a really interesting article I read 2 days ago. I posted it on Twitter. So there's this condition. It's a very rare condition known as prosopometamorphopsia, or PMO. Let's just call it that. The people who are inflicted with this disorder, they see distortions in faces. It causes pretty much everyone's face to appear distorted. And the person who was one of the subjects in the study that this article was based on, he described these distortions in people's faces as demonic. They were able to create a photorealistic visualization, like a recreation of what these people are describing, because I guess this one patient only saw the distortions in real life. And if you looked at regular picture of someone or on a screen, it wouldn't distort the face. But if you saw them in real life, it would look like a demon, essentially, which is wild. They took what the person saw on the screen and then what they saw in real life, and they kind of, I guess, matched them up and basically recreated what these people see in these like demon faces that they see every day. And it's fucking horrifying. Like, I'm going to send you this picture, and it gives you the regular face and then the way the face looks to the people who have this disorder. And I can't imagine walking around every day. It is truly looks demonic.
I just got it pulled up.
Oh, you just pulled it up?
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's nuts. They,
It
they
makes people
basically,
look like a goblin.
yeah, that's what they described it as, is demonic. The one guy can tell the difference because he sees the people on the screen and then sees them in real life. And it looks like they have Chelsea grins. I don't know if you know what that is, but
Yeah, like the Joker. That's
yeah,
what it
exactly.
reminds
Yeah.
me of.
Yep, that's that. Yeah, they have like pointy ears, basically look like yeah, demons or like goblins, or it's weird. And then they go and see this every day. And it just makes you wonder if you saw distorted faces or that could be induced within your own brain somehow. I mean, I'm sure it can. It does happen to these people with this condition. So um yeah, maybe some of the goblins or evil spirits or demons people see are just distortions of faces that can be explained by this disorder.
It is related. Have you seen the Black Mirror? I think the episode is called Men Against Fire, and they talk about like the roaches. It's like a very military themed episode. And the soldier is like, in the beginning of the episode, he's like going through all these missions and these they look so non-human, and they're attacking him and he's shooting them and they're like, yeah, we're killing roaches, this is awesome. And then by the end of the episode, he realizes that he's just been reprogrammed, and his brain is tricking him into seeing these things as looking evil and looking sinister and bloodthirsty. But
Wow.
really, it's just whatever the way he's been programmed to be in this military has reset his brain into seeing them as only enemy combatants. And by the end of the episode, he's like just being fucked with. And this guy's like turning off his vision and then turning off his ability to talk and turning off his ability to hear, making his whole world clearly a set of mirrors and
Oh
smoke.
man.
It's a really crazy episode, and it's called Men Against Fire. I hope everybody watches it.
All this makes me really excited, really, really excited for Neuralink. Did you see?
Oh God. Well, that could be ripe for abuse.
Did
I've
you see
heard.
the pictures? It looks like a medieval surgery.
Yeah, dude, it looked like the knobs coming out of Frankenstein's neck.
Oh, it's so scary. I'm sure DARPA has something much nicer. It's probably like a nice little swim cap or something. So something padded and not jagged and metal and sticking out of your skull. That shit was gnarly. But I'm really happy for the people who get it and it helps them. I mean, I am like I won't be sticking something like that in my head. There's this whole issue of quantum cryptography protecting against quantum attacks from quantum computers. Yeah, man, I want that figured out before I start putting computers up in there. And, people can fucking hack my thoughts or something. I don't.
I want to get the surgery that Wolverine gets from Stryker, where they make his bones metal. I think that would be sick. That would be
Yeah.
the one I choose if I were to get a procedure to make me superhuman. That's the comic book one that I would choose.
What if you had to get it without anesthesia? God, it
Yes.
sounds painful.
I'm just kidding.
Sounds fucking painful.
You're gonna get a knock on my door. It's like, you've been selected for a special project.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, we got some Kuru news if you want to talk about prions.
Kuru. Oh,
And it's pronounced prion. I just found out like 2 weeks ago.
oh shit. And I was calling it prions.
Me too. Well, it sounds
It's
more,
okay.
prion sounds cooler. Not that these are ever cool at all.
You said prions is the proper?
Well, it makes me think of like Prius. These are a lot deadlier, apparently. But now they're doing studies. They went over to Papua New Guinea where this whole Kuru thing started. Yeah, they're trying to figure out why they are resistant to it. People in certain tribes over there. Yeah, I don't know if people read my cattle mutilation article, but it essentially goes in and documents a lot of what Colm Keller, who worked for NIDS, and Robert Bigelow at Skinwalker Ranch, he put out a paper back in the early 2000s about how cattle mutilations represent a covert infectious disease monitoring program. It's a whole thing. His idea is that there's some entity, be it government or not, or private, that is monitoring the spread of prion diseases in America, pretty much, and probably all over the world. Cattle mutilations are signs of this monitoring. They call it different things. The prion disease, it's called chronic wasting disease, and which I think happens in deer and natural wilderness environments. There's mad cow disease that everyone knows about. And there's Kuru, which is when humans eat humans. And mad cow disease happened because they were feeding cattle high protein diets so that they could withstand the hormones they were being injected with. Those high protein diets just happened to be like cattle waste that was scooped off the floor in the slaughterhouses and shit. It's cannibalism that causes this Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease in humans. And that's the prion disease in humans, CJD. And the initial CJD is called Kuru. That was where this disease is thought to originate, was cannibals, basically cannibalism taking place over in Papua New Guinea. Yeah, apparently they felt the need to publish a paper in the American Journal of Human Genetics to lay the foundation for future research on the fatal disease Kuru, a disease transmitted during the traditional anthropogagic mortuary practices, which means, cannibalism. Out of respect for these communities, we do not use the word cannibalism to describe this practice, but instead refer to it as mortuary feasts or anthropogagic mortuary practices. It was thought that anyone who attended a mortuary feast and ate infected brain tissue would die of kuru. But that was not correct. When the Papua New Guinea Institute of Medical Research field team interviewed elderly people in the affected population, it was clear that there were people who participated in multiple mortuary feasts, but nevertheless survived. The kuru epidemic dwindled over decades after the mortuary practices were outlawed in the 50s. However, researchers remain interested in the disease, particularly in understanding how some people lived after attending these feasts. Kuru is a type of prion disease, which includes BSE, which is commonly known as mad cow disease, and its variant, CJD, which sickened humans who consume infected cattle, particularly in the UK. Prion diseases are incurable and fatal diseases caused by the change in shape of the body's normal prion protein. Researchers are interested in exploring how humans can be protected from them. I think we know why. There have been several recent studies that prion disease is involved in Alzheimer's disease. A lot of these prion diseases can take decades to manifest, and that was kind of what Colm Keller was getting at. He was saying that pretty much all these Alzheimer's diseases and the increase in Alzheimer's disease was really just CJD being misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's disease, because CJD was taking decades to manifest. And that's something I've been kind of harping on for some reason. I don't know. No one likes it, but I think it's definitely something to look at and keep an eye on, especially now that they're going back to the original source in Papua New Guinea, where Kuru originated. I think it was one of the MK Ultra doctors had people from Papua New Guinea send him brains while he was at Fort Detrick so he could study Kuru and how it could be used as a biological weapon. Now it's basically spread throughout our wilderness and in our food supply. And yeah, sorry, I took that tangent, but I think it's kind of a PSA that people should probably start paying attention to.
Yeah, and Alzheimer's is no joke. For those who are familiar, have been affected by it, and to my understanding, there's no cure for Alzheimer's. There's no cure for mad cow disease. Just given those two things, I don't know if you know anything or if you're familiar with diseases that don't have cures, but a lot of the time they're pretty concerning, like fear provoking to people. Like we saw about what was the one? Ebola. Ebola was one that people were very panicked about very quickly. I don't know, dude. I thought the response to Ebola was pretty good, and given like how COVID was, I think that's something that lends credence to the idea that research is being done on these scary topics behind the scenes. That's certainly the impression I get, is that there's plans in place if shit hits the fan, so to speak.
I think the problem with this, and Clem Keller talks about it, is that people knew and didn't do anything about it. And there was a lot of stuff that was covered up. And that's why these covert disease monitoring operations were covert in general. That's the reason why, is because they didn't want people to know or freak out. The result of that is letting this shit fester throughout the population for decades and then calling it Alzheimer's disease when it was really something you let happen like 40 years ago. I think that's going to be the problem. Yeah, that's like kind of its own thing. We'll see. I don't know. I could be wrong. Com Keller could be wrong, but he knows his shit, man. Read his book, Brain Trust, and I don't know what else to say about it. I feel like I'm screaming into the void. I mean, I don't know what you do about it. Like you stop eating meat, I guess. I don't know.
There's been outbreaks of mad cow disease in the
Yeah.
past, right? That's how we know about it. So how was it handled in the past?
I think potentially there is it's faster acting in some people. I think there might be a genetic predisposition for it to manifest as a dementia like symptom a lot earlier. I guess for most people, it's very, very, very slow onset. Yeah, when people talk about early onset Alzheimer's, perhaps it's I don't know, man. I don't want to freak people out. I just would pay attention because now they're going back to the original place, seeing how people were immune to prion disease. Seems like a pretty important thing to pay attention to, especially when they're posting it in American Journal of Human Genetics. Seems like something to keep an eye on. That's all I'm saying.
And it's very fascinating to me that Colm Kelleher is a biologist that works on a lot of Robert Bigelow's teams. We see Robert Bigelow constantly attacked for his efforts to study some of these topics. And it makes me wonder if some of these companies that sell meat or that sell gas or sell whatever the hell Bigelow's into, you know what I mean? Like concerning energy or concerning the topics they cover in Skinwalker Ranch, If Kelleher is studying some of these things and has information that isn't positive for their bottom line, there's money in this, is what I'm trying to say. There's money in how this topic is going to be covered and presented to people.
It's just the whole history of it. These brains were sent to Fort Detrick, where all sorts of fucking Nazis experiments and yeah, paperclip stuff happened, and biological warfare research was carried out. And I don't know. I feel like something's going to come from that as part of disclosure, because it is wrapped up in all this shit with the same secret groups and the Nazi scientists. And part of the cover up should involve some sort of biological thing. Maybe that's where the baggage comes from that David Grush talks about.
Yeah, or that idea that we need a church style committee. I've heard people say that needs to happen as well. And that was the end of MK Ultra. So yeah, curious to see what Burchett and Luna have heard in those skiffs.
Didn't you have something about nuclear experiments on people at Trinity? I think that was what we were originally talking about.
This excerpt from Jacques Vallée's Trinity starts with Edgar Mitchell, who we talked about just previously on this podcast. It says, perhaps a large part of the activity that's classified as UFO activity, abduction, and the whole host of this type may very well not be due to extraterrestrial activity at all. I would suspect that if any is due to ET activity, it is a rather small part, and a larger portion is due to human type, Earthling type activity in a very clandestine fashion. And this is what the excerpt says. What the Padilla Ranch teaches us is that the real secret isn't readily operational, waiting for us in the vaults of the intelligence community or the Pentagon, just waiting for some bureaucrat to pull out the declassified stamp and triumphantly slam it on the document to the applause of an appreciating public, even less at the White House, where political plots are hatched and little more. If there is evidence for such a secret, it may reside with the long term keepers of the atomic knowledge, because they are the ones who had custody of the 1945 craft seen by Jose and Remy. They would appropriately follow their own different parallel system of clearances at the highest level, the nuclear clearances, as opposed to the ordinary national security clearances that thousands of government employees and industry technicians hold. It would be their baby, after all, delivered to their doorstep less than an hour from Stallion Gate, just 1 month after their bomb. Nobody would want to acknowledge that or need to. We shouldn't even fantasize about a cabal or a secret government or a Vatican plot or a grotto of Bavarian Illuminati dressed in funny robes. More prosaically, the keepers of the secret, I prefer to call them the custodians, because they may not have gained any real understanding of what they are supposedly guarding, may be a specialized team that cuts across the stovepipes, classified technology development, and needs no points of regular interaction with ongoing intelligence projects, pontificating academics, or congressional envoys, because they are self contained. The only thing elected officials would have to know about them is the fact that they need to be left alone beyond the purview and oversight of most legislative and judicial bodies. And that has been the state of affairs for 75 years. The situation is exemplified by what Dr. Louis Hempelman, Laura Fermi's boss at Los Alamos, said in a 1945 statement, not revealed until 1986, however, regarding the effects of lingering radiation on grazing livestock and the ranchers who tend to the animals. He acknowledged that, quote, a few people were probably overexposed, but they couldn't prove it and we couldn't prove it. So we just assumed we got away with it, end quote. To his credit, Dr. Hempelman did officially request that the War Department investigate the health of residents of Bingham, the closest town north of Trinity. But according to an article in Health Physics published in 2010, it seems the request only led to nonspecific questioning under some pretext. Quote, they were never told, you might want to leave. You might not want to sell that cattle, end quote, observed Remy Baca. It was only in 1980 that the ranchers found out that the real reason for those visits by Army intelligence had to do with observing them to document the human effects of the bomb on them and their kids.
That's insane.
That's just a wicked aspect of all this. And I hope Tom DeLonge's Trinity touches on that.
Yeah, me too. I think public health is honestly a big part of disclosure and the problem with yanking it out, the resistance to it and being truthful. There was one thing I wanted to follow up on from before. I made the point and totally lost it about the zookeeper.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I saw you made a really interesting post on that.
There's this general hypothesis called the zoo hypothesis that I think a lot of our listeners know about already, but it's essentially stating that there is an NHI or whatever we're interacting with these UAP and abduction experiences and just general experiences with paranormal phenomena. We are a zoo sequestered away in some corner of the universe, an experiment or something like that. And there are zookeepers, which are the NHI. The idea with the nuclear connection is that the zookeepers are getting a little concerned that the monkeys are fucking around with nukes. That's what Lou Elizondo said several times, has made that zookeeper analogy. I guess my point was that they would be more like beekeepers than zookeepers because beekeepers create honey and humans find that useful, but bees likely don't know that we take their honey. I'm sure they're aware of honey. I don't think they know that we purposely keep beehives for that sole purpose of honey. Perhaps it's more along the lines of that and not like a zoo. Aliens come and like check us out and like we're lions or some shit behind a cage. But it's more like they find something that we do or produce to be useful. And that goes back to the whole idea of a symbiotic relationship between humans and the phenomenon we spoke about earlier with that Peter Levenda was talking about. I mean, I guess you could go immediately to the Loosh idea where they feed off negative energy and that kind of myth and all the religions and stuff like that. But yeah, I think there just might be something that we don't see on a day-to-day basis as something that would benefit something else. But and Tom's talked about that too with the nuclear connection. Perhaps they're more concerned about our DNA getting messed with from radiation than the actual nuclear weapons themselves. Could be a combination of both, but I had never heard that before Tom said it, that they were potentially more concerned with nukes affecting our DNA.
Yeah, I like the idea of us being, or I don't like the idea of it, but I think that that's a very interesting
Yeah.
idea that we are a commodity or that we're producing a commodities.
But is that just selfish as like a human ego thing? I don't know. I don't really see that as an ego thing because we're being used for something. We're just another step in the food chain, another step on the ladder.
I'm saying this as I'm holding open a book about beekeeping, and I'm taking it as literally as possible. So there's a book called A Beekeeper's Manual, The Hive and the Honeybee
Oh,
by
you
a
sent
guy
me
named
shit. Yeah.
L.L. Langstruth. And I think I mentioned it really, really long ago of how I was like reading about beekeeping, things that I had no idea had to do with like bee behavior and how they like produce about a bunch of honey. And this book was published in the 1800s and it still to this day is considered like one of the authoritative texts on beekeeping. They're talking about swarming. They talk about the loss of the queen. They talk about transferring bees from different hives, robbing bees, directions for feeding bees. But some of the parts I had highlighted are in chapter 2. And he says, in all caps, it says, a honeybee never volunteers an attack or acts on the offensive when it is gorged or filled with honey. And later on, it says, bees cannot, under any circumstances, resist the temptation to fill themselves with liquid sweets. It would be quite as easy for an inveterate miser to look with indifference upon a golden shower of double eagles falling at his feet and soliciting his appropriation. If then we cannot if then we can contrive a way to call their attention to a treat of running sweets, when we wish to perform any operation which might provoke them, we may be sure they will accept it and under its genial influence allow us without molestation to do what we please.
Yeah, there you go.
So I think that if you're translating that to the phenomenon, I think that we're being showered with sweets that we
Yeah,
can't resist the temptation of,
the
and
technology.
then we're not able to really look up and
There we
recognize what's
go.
going on. So
We just
yeah,
solved it. We just solved
L.L.
UFOs.
Langstruth, the beekeeper,
Oh
solved.
my god, that's horrifying. I hate that so much. We're just gorged with honey, leaking, and what are you gonna do? I did see a crazy article about bees. This gave me kind of a warm and fuzzy feeling. I don't know. I think it's sad that bees can only live like 60 days tops. This made me happy. In a groundbreaking discovery, bumblebees have been shown to possess a previously unseen level of cognitive sophistication. A new study reveals that these fuzzy pollinators can learn complex, multi step tasks through social interaction, even if they cannot figure them out on their own. This challenges the long held belief that such advanced social learning is unique to humans, and even hints at the presence of key elements of cumulative culture in these insects. The research team designed a two-step puzzle box requiring bumblebees to perform two distinct actions in sequence to access a sweet reward at the end. Training bees to do this was no easy task, and bees had to be helped along by the addition of an extra reward along the way. This temporary reward was eventually taken away, and bees subsequently had to open the whole box before getting their treat. Surprisingly, while individual bees struggled to solve the puzzle when starting from scratch, those allowed to observe a trained demonstrator bee readily learned the entire sequence, even the first step, while only getting a reward at the end. The study demonstrates that bumblebees possess a level of social learning previously thought to be exclusive to humans. They can share and acquire behaviors that are beyond their individual cognitive capabilities, an ability thought to underpin the expansive, complex nature of human culture, and one previously thought to be exclusive to us. So the swarm is getting smart, dude. That's wild, right?
Yeah, dude. That
Bees are smart as shit. There's a picture at the top, and it's like two bees like hanging out, and one of them's teaching the other one how to solve the puzzle to get a treat. I don't know. That was the part that I guess was the picture that made me all warm and fuzzy. But yeah, it's crazy. Small things that live for 2 months. They develop this level of social learning that is basically just believed to be for humans.
Yeah, but I think as
It's a bee,
Fuck.
dude. It's like so small. Their brains are like the size of a seed. Maybe we're just not that special, I guess is my point.
Have you ever heard of the founder of Sparta named Lycurgus?
Is that like a company?
No, Lycurgus was a lawmaker.
Like Sparta?
I don't know if he's considered to be literally real. Online, it says it is not clear if Lycurgus was an actual historical figure. However, many ancient historians believe that he instituted the communalistic and militaristic reforms, most notably the Great Retra, which transformed Spartan society. The Spartan constitution. A lot of ancient coins you can see have bees on them. Kyrgyz built his model for the perfect Spartan government on the social strata observed in the beehive. I hope I
What?
explained that okay. Here's something good that it says about Lycurgus and what I'm trying to explain. It says, in a word, he trained his fellow citizens to have neither the wish nor the ability to live for themselves. But like bees, they were to make themselves always integral parts of the whole community, clustering together about their leader, almost beside themselves with enthusiasm and noble ambition, and to belong wholly to their country. This idea can be traced also in some of their utterances. For instance, Parietus, when he failed to be chosen among the 300 best men, went away with a very glad countenance, as if rejoicing that the city had 300 better men than himself. And again, Polycratidas, one of an embassy to the generals of the Persian king, on being asked by them whether the embassy was there in a private or public capacity, replied, if we succeed in a public capacity, if we fail in a private. Again, Argoleonis, the mother of Brasidas, when some Amphipolitans who had come to Sparta paid her a visit, asked them if Brasidas had died nobly in a manner worthy of Sparta. Then they greatly extolled the man and said that Sparta had not such another, to which she answered, say not so, strangers. Brasidas was noble and brave, but Sparta has many better men than he. I don't know. I don't know if you would call that nationalism, this idea that the whole is greater than the one.
Hive mind.
Yeah, it's like a hive mind. Like you're everybody's an integral part of the community clustering together.
Yeah.
But that's when I was really in down the bee rabbit hole, and I was trying to learn about ancient beliefs about bees and the jewelry of Crete is
Yeah.
ridden with all sorts of bees and wasps. They touch on that in Secret Machines, like you said. It's really interesting.
And then you wonder about once again, Neuralink, everyone linking their brains together. It's pretty much a super being. It's what Thomas Bearden described in 1977. He basically said that the human race had to link all their brains together. Our differences would just we just destroy ourselves basically, and that seems to be coming to fruition. So it's either Neuralink or the death of humans. That's Tom Bearden's stance. Maybe not Neuralink specifically, but a like a giant superhuman hive mind. I'm actually going to read that real quick because I think it's a good way to fucking end it. It's going to be a hell of a fucking episode to edit. So Tom Bearden talks about something back in he was a colonel for the army and he used to write papers. He did wargaming and was a nuclear engineer actually. Smart guy. People tried to discredit him. I'm not a physicist, so I can't really make a judgment call on how legit his science was. But I mean, he knew his shit obviously. But he did have this theory of UFOs. This is actually on the dot mil website. There's a PDF, one of the papers on there. He basically goes between 5 stages or 6 stages as a species. We're a technological stage 5 species. The UFO phenomenon represents a 6th stage being that's kind of guiding us into basically linking all our brains together. So this is what his paper says. Thus, for the unlinked 5th stage technological species, there are only 2 alternatives. First, and more likely, its intraspecies conflict will simply reach a critical mass and the species will convulsively destroy itself in its biosphere. Humanity may be within 25 years or less of this asymptote now. So this is in 1977. Second, and less likely, the species may link into a 6th stage superbeing and eliminate its internal competition, friction, and suicidal bent. Linkage appears extremely unlikely unless outside assistance and intervention are received. But there may, after all, be evidence of such an intervention. The phenomena, loosely classified as unidentified flying objects, appear to directly fit the strange characteristics to be expected of a linked 6th stage superbeing engaged in giving prenatal assistance to the embryonic human species and preparing it for linkage birth of the species into a new superbeing. If, for example, we assume from the latest archaeological findings that man, in essentially his present form, has existed for about 5 million years on planet Earth, and if we roughly assume that modern science is only about 100 years old, then modern science represents a window of less than 0.3 times 10 to the negative 4 times the width of the total human experience. The search in the cosmos for intelligent life exhibiting our particular technical characteristics would appear to have little chance for success. Any other species at man's present technical level is progressing so rapidly toward destruction or linkage that man's detection of its narrow window will very likely not occur, or occur only after it has already vanished as a 5th stage species. Either alternative for a 5th stage species eliminates it as a 5th stage species. It is no accident that man's universe appears devoid of other 5th stage species at our own technological level. From the window viewpoint alone, one can essentially assign a probability of unity to the assumption that the UFO phenomena represent the contact of the human species with a 6th stage being. Thus, the UFO phenomena can be fitted to the hypothesis that they represent a prenatal care of the Earthman by a linked superbeing in preparation for the forthcoming linkage of the human species and the birth of another linked superbeing. To paraphrase Shakespeare, indeed, there may be stranger things in heaven and earth than we have dreamt of in our philosophies. Thomas Bearden, 1977, paper called The One Human Problem, Its Solution, and Its Relation to UFO Phenomena.
Yeah, we're hearing Tom Bearden's name a lot more. I don't know about you, but I feel like we're pretty close to the pulse on this topic. And
Yeah.
I constantly hear his papers being brought up. Even just as I shuffled through Invisible College, Jacques Vallée mentions Tom Bearden in Invisible College.
Joseph Farrell talks about them all the time. This basically jives with the idea that they're guiding us. Bearden was saying this separately in 77. So they're guiding us to become like a basically hive mind, and that's kind of what Tom's
Right,
saying is
like
that they're
guiding collective behavior.
it's basically a do or die. Like either you link all together or you destroy yourself. If you're linked together, then there's no tensions between factions and that kind of thing. It's pure empathy, pure understanding of your fellow man because you're all part of the same body. It's basically like having your right hand and your left hand being 2 different people, but they're part of the same body, the same consciousness, I guess, is how I've heard it described. The UFO phenomenon in Thomas Bearden's theory is guiding us to become another UFO phenomenon, super bang, whatever it is. I guess some might call it like a hyperdimensional object. It's kind of a wild theory, but I don't think it's crazier than anything else we fucking talked about on here.
Yeah, and that connection into psychotronics is gonna be something that, like,
Yeah.
I don't even know how news about that is gonna be broken, if it's broken at all. I feel like it's gonna end up happening with some committee just based on the UFO stuff that's come out recently. You can tell the attitude they're giving is like, "Nope, we are not gonna budge on this. We are gonna gaslight you. We are gonna go after whistleblowers." And I wish it wasn't like that. Tim Burchett said it is an issue of transparency, and they continue to make the subject sound ridiculous and make it sound like we're talking about bullshit or stuff that, like, only insane people care about.
Shot Kirkpatrick has swamp gas breaking into his house
Yeah. What
on a
was that?
weekday. I don't know. It's fucking nuts. I just don't get why we can't figure out like what's actually going on. Maybe it's the phenomenon itself. That's one thing I think about enough. But that just makes me like mad and like feel helpless, I guess. Regardless, when it comes to government transparency, it's always worth fighting for, whether it's UFOs or something else. Just our history is important to know so we can learn from it and change our behavior to make better choices in the future. Pretty reasonable thing to expect.
If you keep a secret for 80 years, that's one thing. And that's really on a human to human basis. I think that's really weird. But if you're talking about keeping the secret now and continuing a cover up, at what cost? At what amount of money? What, and that's the thing is like another thing is there's no oversight congressionally. Money is getting funneled into these programs in all sort of bizarre ways. If private companies are involved, there's a whole other world just lurking out there. We as the public are going to be the victims of that because we now become vulnerable to all sorts of misinformation. It's like a noble lie. You know what I mean? It's the idea that they're going to
Right.
conceal this for for the greater good. Well, is it the greater good if our entire public now becomes vulnerable because we don't have any trust in our government? I think that's the crossroads that we're at right now is that the faith in our institutions is eroding and there's this chance to really show that like they've acted in good faith in some way. And I think that companies like To the Stars are saying, listen, we're giving you the opportunity and we're extending an olive branch for you to talk about these topics in a meaningful way that isn't something people chuckle at and people can see what heroes are involved in these programs. Unfortunately, every indication I see is that it's like, we do not care. We are going to keep this secret.
And you see it with what they tried to do with Congress. They tried to do it the right way with whistleblowers coming forward and setting it up so that they could do it through the right channels and there wouldn't have to be any leaking of classified information or videos or anything like that. They set it up with the videos that Elizondo got out of the Pentagon was like, hey, we can do this, and but we want to do it the right way. Yeah, they tried to do it that way, and it doesn't seem like it worked because Kirkpatrick's running around like an idiot, embarrassing everyone at Arrow. You kind of have to wonder how do you deal with what sounds like, if you read Gold Warriors or any of these books, Peter Levenda, it sounds like a transnational, like organized crime syndicate, basically. That's being run by at least some people in factions of our intelligence and military establishments are involved in. Like a lot of this stuff, they originated in like the top of the top in our national security state. Crimes were being committed in the name of national security. How do you rid a system of that kind of thing where that system itself is built upon that kind of thing? It's almost impossible.
Yeah, they've built a castle on pillars of sand.